Well, listen, it is that time again. That's right, that time that we call Roughing It. Listen, it's the time that we come together to maximize our relationships. We come so that we might be maximized in all of our relationships. So it doesn't matter if it's professional, doesn't matter if it's personal, family. We cover principles that helps you to maximize all of your relationship characteristics, qualities, so that you can have the most out of relationships that mean the most to you. And so listen, we're not here in relationship just by ourselves. Listen, we're here in relationship with others. And because we're here in relationship with others, we want to make sure that we bring into this space and place. That's right. We want to make sure that we bring into this space and place those that we're in relationship with. So listen, if you're watching this on the rebroadcast or you're watching this live, listen, this is the time that we just begin to invite, we begin to share, we begin to let people know that this is the space and place to be. And so listen, I want you to know that, listen, if you are here and you're watching us on YouTube, I want you to go ahead and begin to listen, subscribe to our channel. That's right, I want you to hit that subscribe button. I want you to hit that bell icon so that you can go ahead and get the notifications when we go live. Just like today, we changed up the time in which we were going live, but you would not have known that unless you were subscribed to the channel and you hit that notification. If you are here with us on Facebook, listen, we want to make sure that you're following us on Facebook. How do you do that? You want to make sure that you like that page. You like our page. Now, listen, we always encourage people to share. And so you may be watching this on somebody else's page. But listen, if you're going to ask questions at the live recording of this, then I need for you to come over to the LifeEmpowermentCh page. And so listen, here, I want to make sure that you like our page. I want to also make sure that you follow us. That's how you get the notifications of when we change up things, when we go live. You will get that notification because you have subscribed to our Facebook page. And listen, you know how we always say, let's like, let's follow, let's share. Let's make sure that we're coming together in this space and place together with those that mean the most to us. Because when we learn together, we grow together. Listen, that's right. When we learn together, we grow together. And so listen, I want to go ahead and thank you once again for being here for Roughing It. So as we are getting ready to dive into our series where we've been talking about resolving conflicts in relationships, resolving conflicts in relationships. This is what we've been covering. And so we want to go ahead and begin to move right into what it is that we're covering today. And so listen, so let me go ahead and bring up on the screen for you. Listen, you know that one of the things that we talk about here is that when we're looking at our relationships, that these are relationships that are not just about who we are relationally, right? Because we understand that we're spirit, soul, and body. And because we're spirit, soul, and body, we understand that there is a spiritual aspect to our relationships. And because there's this spiritual aspect, I want to have you see this particular passage here. And notice it says, when neighbors feud or lovers quarrel or nations war, the predictable remedy prescribed by the voices of reason is communication. Now, I said that I was going to bring up a scripture. Now, obviously, that is not a scripture, but that is a quote. And so here's the reality. that no matter what kind of relationships that we are discussing here today, doesn't matter if we're talking about our neighbors, right? Community relationships, we're talking about lovers, we're talking about romantic relationships, our spouses, maybe who we're dating, who we're engaged to. Listen, doesn't matter if we're talking about get into professional relationships, we get into diplomatic relationships and all these other different types. Here's the reality, that if you and I are going to do well, if you and I are going to be successful relationally, communication is the key. Communication is the foundation to any relationship that is going to thrive, any relationship that is going to do well. And therefore, because of that, let us go here into this passage. Now, this passage, I think, really highlights what it is that we are trying to really get into. And so here in Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 16, in the Message translation, it says, if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him, work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you have made a friend. And so here we understand that when we're talking about working out relationship conflicts, we're talking about resolving conflicts in relationships. One of the things that we understand spiritually is that the ability, now the know-how may be part of what we're discussing today, but the ability to be able to solve the issues, resolve the conflict, lies within us. Listen, not just you as the victim, not just you as the offender, but it lies within us. Why? Because we have the ability spiritually to work through issues, to resolve issues, but often we don't want to really call upon and really dig deep into who we are. It's a lot easier to just walk away, to let issues linger, and to not really delve into the parts that are really significant. And so I think spiritually, it starts off helping us to understand that we have the ability to resolve issues. Notice what this even goes on to say. Look here, even as we look at this next part, it says, if he won't listen, take one or two others along so that the presence, so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest and try again. So here we see once again that when we look here at this particular passage, that he's communicating that even if you and I are not able to resolve this by ourselves, that we're bringing other people who are able to objectively help us to really work through the challenges, because sometimes the reality is that we all have blind spots. That's right. Listen, if you have been here through this particular teachings, resolving conflicts in relationship, you understand because of our personality, have blind spots. And because we have those blind spots, sometimes persons that are objective can see better from the outside in than sometimes we can see from the inside out. And so he says, listen, sometimes it requires you and I to bring in some other people so that we might be able to get to resolution, not because we were incapable, but we need the assistance of others to really help us resolve issues. Now, sometimes that becomes very difficult because, when we talking about our issues, sometimes the truth of the reality is that we don't want to bring in somebody else. Sometimes we're ashamed. Sometimes we're embarrassed. Sometimes we feel like I don't want these persons kind of prying into my business. But the reality is that sometimes that we have to have someone else, sometimes maybe even more than one person, to help us resolve the conflict that we may be unable to do ourselves. And so I'm saying to you today that, listen, let us understand spiritually that you and I can resolve conflicts. Now, let us understand soulishly, mentally, relationally, emotionally. How do we exactly go about doing that? And so here, one of the things that we talked about in the previous teaching, we covered this in part 1, we're on part 3 today. We talked about what was conflict. We really broke that down and we really spent some time on it. But in a nutshell, it is simply disagreement. Now, because it is simply disagreement, as simple as that is, when you begin to understand that there are so many other variables that come into play, that therefore this is why, as simple as it can become something that is difficult for us to really solve and to really work out because of the complexities that come along within the process. And so we begin to talk about what was the difference between conflict management and conflict resolution. Because we're not just here to manage, right? We're here to resolve. But you have to understand how you manage conflict in order to get to a place where you can resolve conflict. And so, therefore, this is why we've covered those particulars as it relates to you and I moving forward. Now, here last week, we were talking about the 4 major ways in which we manage conflict. Now, we began to talk about these particular different personalities and the defaults that we often have when it comes to managing conflict. And so we had covered 3 of them last week. And I said that, hey, we were going to look at number 4 this week. And so number 4 has to deal with the assertive conflict management / resolution. Because this assertiveness is not just about managing conflict. It's not just the process of how we talk about the issue, how we work through the issue, but it is also getting to the place that where we're resolving the conflict, where we are eliminating this from being an ongoing problem to the point that it creates conflict. Now, we may have to continue to talk about it because things may evolve over time. You talk about parenting and the relationships that you have as a parent with a child. You talk about marriage and the relationship that you have, with your spouse. You talk about a friendship that is a friendship that you've had over the years. You're evolving, things are changing, different variables are coming into play. And so we may have to keep talking about something that we're working on, not because we're trying to manage the conflict, but we're trying to stay at a place where we're resolving this as the elements will adapt or the elements will change or the elements will kind of differ because different things happen as we're growing, as we are evolving. When you have friendships and sometimes, hey, this friendship has gone through a divorce. This friend has gone through, maybe some kind of laying off of their job. All of those things can impact your friendship. And so therefore, things that we may have thought, well, hey, we've already dealt with that. We've already covered that. Well, as things evolve, we may not necessarily have to go back to the beginning, but we may have to do some work as it relates to the ongoing component of our relationship. Now, once again, if you have any questions, you can put those here on Facebook, on our LifeEmpowermentCh Facebook page, or right here on our YouTube channel. And so here, when we're talking about the assertive conflict management resolution style, as I said to you last week, this is not one that is a personality. Why? Because you and I do not automatically know how to be assertive. There are sometimes people that talk about somehow people have a natural inclination to sometimes demonstrate some of these characteristics. But the reality is that all of us over time will have to have some kind of training. We will have to have some kind of learning. We have to have some type of learning curve so that we can understand the defaults of our own personality and really learn how to be assertive, because assertiveness is a skill. It is not a personality trait. Let me say that again. Assertiveness is a skill. It is not a personality trait. And so therefore, here, let us look at a good definition of assertiveness. So here, when you can see this on the screen, let me just enlarge this. Assertiveness, it is the ability to express your feelings, beliefs, and thoughts, and to defend your rights in a non-destructive manner. Now, let me say that again, because I think that's a mouthful. Listen, assertiveness, it is the ability, and let me say ability is the learned skill, to express your feelings, beliefs, and thoughts, to defend your rights in a non-destructive manner. So when you understand this definition of assertiveness, you begin to understand that, listen, when you have somebody that is assertive, he or she, listen, is not telling others what to think or feel. They are telling others how they think and how they feel. Listen, they are not hiding their thoughts. They are not hiding their feelings. They respect the need of others, but at the same time, they are trying to make an effort to make sure in a respectful manner that they are expressing their desires, their thoughts, what's happening with them. Listen, they are persons often that have good self-esteem. And because they have good self-esteem, they ultimately recognize that they matter. And because they matter, they believe and understand that their opinions matter, their thoughts matter, their desires matter. Now, they are not saying that they are trumping others at the thought and the desire of themselves, but they're saying, hey, if we're all going to communicate, if we're all going to make sure that our wishes and our thoughts and our desires are known, then it's important that I also contribute to the conversation at hand. Listen, they are honest about their thoughts. Listen, they communicate their feelings in a respectful manner. We're talking about being assertive. Listen, these are persons that actively listen. Now, in a prior series we did on communication, we talked about active listening and what that looks like and what that sounds like. And so listen, they are actively listening. They are actively considering other people's perspective. So they are fully engaged in the conversation. They're fully engaged in what is being transcribed in this dialogue, whether it's one other person or it's several other persons. Listen, here's the thing that I think that is also important. They're able, listen, to maintain control over their feelings, and they can admit when they've made a mistake. See, being assertive is not just a communication technique. It is part of a communication technique, but it is also about being mature so that I am able to understand my emotions, but I'm also able to maintain my emotions. I'm humble enough to be able to admit when I made a mistake, and I can own that. And as much as that may sound basic, the reality is that sometimes in who we're in relationship to, I like to compare a person sometimes to a tree. And like a tree, you have different branches, right? Some branches are longer, some branches are shorter, some branches are stronger, right? Some branches are weaker. But you and I are like trees. And so there are these different branches to who we are. And sometimes when you talk about our overall maturity, sometimes we're not able to really be humble enough to be able to admit our wrongs. Sometimes we're not mature enough to own our own errors and to own our own mistakes and to verbalize them. Now, granted, there are sometimes in some working relationships, some professional settings, you have to be on guard and you have to be careful because sometimes you may do some things that are legally putting yourself in jeopardy. But remember, as much as we're talking about relationship concepts in here, talking about the assertiveness as it relates to conflict resolution, conflict management, ultimately we're talking about using these skill sets in relationships that matter. Relationships that, listen, I want to have in my life. Relationships with people that I want to maintain and keep in my life. And so therefore, these are the kinds of techniques and characteristics that we're really focusing on. And so listen, assertive people, listen, when you have developed assertive skill sets, listen, you will have fewer anxious thoughts, even when you're under stress, because you begin to understand your stress tolerance. You understand your stress maintenance. And so even in uncomfortable settings, because of your assertiveness development, you're able to really maintain who you are. You understand that, listen, I may need to take a break. I may need to take a little exit, not necessarily negating the conversation, but I need a timeout because I want to present and give you my best self. Assertive people, listen, these are the persons that can be firm without being rude. These are the people, listen, that they can communicate well without telling you off, without demeaning you, without putting you down, without being able to put you in a place in which you feel humiliated. See, listen, I can be assertive, and I do not have to do that at the sake or at the stake of your how can I best say that? At the stake of your well-being. And so therefore, listen, we're talking about assertiveness. And see, this is why I'm describing what assertiveness looks like, so that you and I might be able to understand what that can entail for you and I. But at the same time, let me also say this. There can be dangers. Listen now, look at this. There can be dangers of not asserting ourselves. Let me say that again. Listen, there can be dangers of us not asserting ourselves. Now you may say, well, what are those dangers? Now, once again, if you have questions, you can put those on the comments section here on Facebook or YouTube. When you and I, listen, are not able to assert ourselves, sometimes this is research. People, listen, can experience sensitivity, and I would say even hypersensitivity to criticism. And I'm talking about, it can be constructive criticism. I'm talking about criticism that can be for your good, but because I'm not assertive, I may have some self-esteem issues. I may have some confidence issues. I may have some challenges as it relates to my own value, my own sense of worth. And so therefore, because of that, when someone gives criticism that's constructive, listen, it can put me in a bad space and place. Sometimes it can lead to extreme passivity. When you and I are not assertive, it can also lead to insecurity. And so I can be in a space where somebody is asking my thoughts, they're asking my opinions, they're wanting my input, but because of my own insecurity, I may not offer up that information. I may be in the back of my mind thinking, what would you think if I tell you this? What would you do with this information if I give it away? And as much as, listen, there is confidentiality and there's a confidant that we want to develop, within the dynamic of relationships, The reality is that all of that is a process. And so I've got to unveil myself. I've got to begin to kind of pull back the layers. And if I have insecurity, I probably won't allow the relationship to develop to the place where it has the strength to be able to have that kind of stability, because I haven't allowed the process of the unveiling and the intimacy to unravel because of my own insecurity. Sometimes when you and I are not assertive, listen, we can be more anxious. Because listen, we're in a place and we're in a setting in which we're just not comfortable. Nobody's said anything, nobody's done anything, nobody has kind of given us any sign of symptom that we're not safe. But the reality is, because of our own anxiety, our own inability to be comfortable in the setting, it is a sign that we're not assertive, even though we're not having to communicate and necessarily dialogue. The assertiveness is not when I just open my mouth. Assertiveness is not just when I open my ears, but assertiveness is a place in which I am in my being. I am just being assertive, because it's a part of how I see myself. It's a part of how I value myself. And so therefore, my self-esteem is intact. My confidence is intact. And so listen, this is why assertiveness is not just a good thing. It's not just a great thing. I would tell you that assertiveness is a necessary thing, because if you and I are going to be in relationships that matter, if you and I are going to be in relationships that are going to thrive, and you and I are going to have relationships that have fulfillment, then I'm telling you, you and I at some point in the growth and development of that relationship will need to become assertive. And so here, when we are looking at assertiveness, right? And we talked last week about the passivity, and we talked about the personality and the traits and the characteristics that come along with that. The difference between the assertive person and the passive person is that, listen, people who are more passive will go along with the wishes and the desires of others just to please them. Just because, listen, I don't want to do anything to rock the boat. I don't want to do anything that may cause this relationship to somehow lose its growth and development. And so therefore, listen, I am not letting others know what exactly is going on with me. And so, listen, they will let others lead and make most of the decisions. Listen, they have a tendency, listen, to have a lack of confidence. Often, these are persons that will allow someone to belittle them and to put them down. Here's some things that I found in the research of this. Because of this internal conflict, right? Not even a relational conflict, but because of an internal conflict, listen, passive people tend to have a higher level of stress. They tend to have a higher level of resentment in relationships. People that are passive, listen, tend to have a tendency to allow seething anger to reside within them. These are persons that often have difficulty in not just processing their own feelings, but being able to process their feelings in relationship with someone else. People who are passive, listen, often have feelings of victimization. Even though they were not victims, they had the feeling of victimization. And here's another thing that they have found, that people who are passive, listen, often have a desire to have revenge when they have felt wrong. All of these are the kinds of things that happen when you and I are not assertive, when you and I have not learned how to, and listen, let me go back to my definition here of being assertive. As when you and I are looking at being assertive, when you and I are looking at being assertive, this becomes very, very important. And so here, assertiveness, notice now, assertiveness, let's look at this definition again. It is the ability to express your feelings, beliefs, and thoughts, and to defend your rights in a non-destructive manner. Now, as much as we talk about a non-destructive manner, listen, this is not just destructive in terms of the relationship. This can also be in cahoots with a relationship with yourself. See, listen, I can put myself down. I can talk to myself in such a negative, derogatory way that, listen, I haven't done anybody else wrong, but I've done myself so wrong that, listen, I am not good for the relationship. And so therefore, this is why passivity can become destructive when you and I are not assertive. And so here, listen, so let us look here even at the aggressive side of things. What's the difference between being assertive and aggressive? Because there are times in which I think that this can really get confused. I think that this can really get a little misconstrued, because people that are aggressive can say, well, I'm just being assertive. But that's not true. See, when you and I get aggressive and we're not being assertive, here's one of the indications. Your language will change. Listen, your language becomes offensive. And whether it is the profanity or it is simply the derogatory statements, it is the tone in which you're talking, it is the descriptions in which you're using. Listen, that is a sign that I'm no longer being assertive. I am being aggressive. Listen, this is when you're often telling the person what they should think and how they should feel, instead of inquiring, asking, how are they feeling? What are they thinking? Listen, it can even come to the place of where you begin to shame the person. You begin to put down the person, demean the person. Listen, the whole goal is to try to get them to submit to your will and your way. And when those kind of things begin to occur, listen, I am no longer being assertive. I am being aggressive. And it's important that you and I understand the difference and the distinction between the two. Listen, this is when you begin to take on the thoughts. See, listen, once again, being aggressive is not always some outward expression. It is often an inward expression that turns outward. And so, listen, this is when I can begin to feel superior. This is when I can turn to intimidation tactics. This is when, listen, I can even become physically threatening, because it is all about how can I get my way? How can I make this person be manipulated into coming over to my side, doing it exactly this way? And I'm no longer being assertive. I am now being aggressive. Once again, if you have questions, you can put those in the comment section here on Facebook or on YouTube if you're watching this in the live session. Now, the other thing that we also talked about was the passive aggressive. Let's look at the passive aggressive versus the assertiveness. This is when, listen, you may say yes when you really want to say no. Now, there's a thin line between that, because I may need to be sacrificial. I may need to kind of take one for the team. But that's something that I recognize that I need to do. That's not something that I am, when I am saying yes, when I need to say no, that's usually not the place, or usually that's not the realization of what is happening. It's also, listen, here's another way in which you can see passive aggressiveness come out. Sometimes it can come out with somebody being sarcastic. It can come out, listen, because you're gossiping, you're backbiting, you're talking about somebody behind their back. You're upset, you're mad, you don't like what was said, you don't like what was done, but instead of being assertive and talking to the person, you find relief in being able to deal with this behind closed quarters, air kind of all your frustrations out with your girlfriends, with your homies, with your coworkers. And the reality is that this is nothing more than a passive aggressive behavior. Listen, this is when, families will split. This is when churches will split because people begin to, instead of, as we read in the beginning, you deal with the person in which you have the issue with. You deal with the person that has hurt you, the person that has offended you. You deal with that person. You bring in other people to only help to resolve that if we're not making progress solely together. Or I may need help. I may need some objectiveness. I may need for somebody to help mediate this. But when I am being sarcastic, I'm complaining behind their backs. Listen, it is nothing more than a subtle form of passive aggressive behavior. And so listen, it will even show up with a negative attitude. Yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing what was asked. Yeah, I showed up because I said so. But my attitude is bad. It is often another sign of passive aggressive behavior. And this is why I have shared with you last week about these different personality defaults as it relates to conflict management. And this is why I'm showing you the difference between the two. And so therefore, listen, when you and I are in relationship with people that we say that we love, people that we say that matter, people that we say that are meaningful, and people that we want to spend time with, and we want to develop moments with, and we want to live life with them. I'm saying to you, if that's what you and I are saying, then it's well worth the work that it takes to become assertive. See, it's easy to just complain behind their backs and to be passive aggressive. It's easy to just tell them off and give them a piece of your mind and to feel like, oh, I'm glad I got that off my shoulders. And then weeks, days, months later, all the pain that now we've got to work through because in a moment of time, I allowed my lips to say things that was really not what was my heart's communication. That may have been my anger's communication. That may have been my frustration communication, but that was not my heart communication. So now we've got to do all this work to go back and to recover now because of the damage that has been done. And so this is why, you and I, look at this, have to learn to be assertive. Remember, this is not innate. This is not what you and I are given when you and I come into this world. Now, listen, when it comes to learning to be assertive, the reality is that sometimes the communication style that we have is something that we picked up along the way. Sometimes we picked it up from our family. Sometimes we picked it up from some other friendship, some other relationship. And because we have developed sometimes these other communication styles that are not helpful, they are not for the development and the building of our relationships. Sometimes we have to unlearn what was negative, what was bad, and then we have to relearn what is good and healthy and appropriate. And so therefore, you and I have to learn to be assertive. Part of learning to be assertive is being able to understand, do I know my default style, my personality style of communication? One of the ways in which you can assess is, do you voice your opinions or do you remain silent? Do you say yes to additional work even when your plate is full? Are you quick to judge? Are you quick to blame? Do people seem to dread or fear talking to you? All of those are questions that you and I have to ask ourselves, because I promise you, one of those answers will fall into either the passive, the aggressive, or the passive aggressive personality conflict management style. And so the same way that you and I are having to learn to be assertive, listen, notice now, the way you and I are having to learn to be assertive, listen, it is the reality that this takes time and practice. If you have spent years being passive aggressive, you spent years being aggressive, you spent years being passive, listen, you and I are not going to overnight understand all of the components of how that personality conflict management style shows up. But with practice and with time and real work, you and I, listen, can learn how to be assertive. And this is why I always say that, listen, when we learn together, we grow together. So everything that you are learning today, everything that you are hearing today, listen, it is growing you. But if your persons, your friends, your coworkers, those that are in relationship to you, that you say mean something to you, they've got to learn this too. Because listen, when we learn together, we grow together. And so therefore, this is why, it is important that you and I don't just grow ourselves, but we grow within the context of our relationships, which means they are growing also. And so therefore, listen, here's the one thing I would tell you, that when it comes to learning to be assertive, it's not just understanding and assessing your own personality conflict management style, but it is being able to understand that, listen, we're going to start small. Anything, listen, that you are learning, I don't care what it is. Sometimes we think, and I think this is a personality thing, sometimes this is a learning default. Either I get it all or I don't get anything at all. It's like all or nothing thinking. And I'm telling, this is not all or nothing thinking. This is taking small progressive steps. And so listen, I've got to learn how to be assertive. Listen, you may have to go back and listen to this several times. Listen, you may need to do some research. You may need to read some books. You may need to watch some videos. But it is the reality that over time, practicing the right thing, that I'm going to be able to be more assertive, be more conscious of my assertiveness, and really be able to help myself work through these kind of relational conflicts that I have in times maybe mismanaged. I have at times kind of failed to pray to being passive aggressive, being aggressive, or being passive. And so over time, I'm going to get better. But it is also being able to say that, you know what? I'm going to start practicing this. Listen, I may take a friend, I may take somebody that I know and say, listen, I want to practice some things with you. I want to work out some things with you so that I can become more assertive. Now, as much as I am a strong believer for us to do things on our own, there are many of us that are self-taught. But then there are those, and sometimes even for us that are self-taught, that we can only learn so much by ourselves. And this is when, listen, you may need to bring in professional help. There's such a thing as assertive training that is available. Listen, you may need to talk with a therapist because there's some internal work that you need to work through. And so no matter what help you may need, the important thing is that you get the help. That's what's most important, that you and I are not afraid to get the help that we need when we recognize I need help. Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to be better, if I'm going to be a better spouse, if I'm going to be a better friend, if I'm going to be a better coworker, if I'm going to be a better family member, It's not going to happen simply because time has ran its course. It's going to be because I've done the work over time for it to run its course. And so therefore, I want to become better because I want these relationships to be better. And here's what I would say to you in closing today. That listen, I think this is really important. And here's one of the things that I found. If one party in a system changes, then the whole system will change. Let me say that again. If one party in a system changes, then the whole system will change. A change in behavior usually equals a change in the system. How does that show up? Can you give me an example? Let me give you an example. We know the old saying that goes, it takes two to tango. You know, if you're yelling and I'm yelling, we're probably not going to hear each other. But if one of us just begins to talk lower and just to lower our voice, I'm telling you, the other person will begin to lower their voice too. Why? Because they hear how outrageously loud they are. And because they hear that, they recognize, why am I screaming? Why am I yelling? There's no need for it. And so therefore, this is why assertiveness, us being able to change our behavior, begins to change the behavior of those that are in relationship to us. I see that comment there. It says assertiveness is sometimes looked at as being argumentative, so I tend to hold back. And you know what? And this is why I was really distinguishing the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness so that we could really understand what that looks like. And so even if I go back here to our definition of assertiveness, and we see here that, listen, assertiveness, listen, it is the ability to express your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs, listen, and to defend your rights in a non-destructive manner. Listen, I've been told that I am passive aggressive. That is funny. And so this is why we've got to understand what these things look like, because sometimes, like I said, when you are talking with and you're in relationship with other persons and their sometimes inability their inability to deal with conflict, manage conflict, resolve conflict, this is why sometimes there is a lot of confusion when we're trying to resolve conflict, but we both, or not all of us, are working from the same page. And so, listen, I just want to let you know that, listen, this again has been Roughing It. And because, listen, this is Roughing It, listen, this is where we grow together because we learn together. And listen, and because we learn together, we grow together, listen, we begin to have the kind of relationships that matter. We begin to create the kind of moments that makes us want to live life with the people that we have chosen to be in our lives. And so listen, I just want to thank you again for being here for Roughing It. But listen, here's what I also want to say to you. That listen, we appreciate you being here. But listen, I'm asking you to partner with us. You may say, well, what does partnership look like? I'm talking about financially partnering with us. And here's where, listen, I'm saying if you're partnering with us, listen, on Roughing It, you can Cash App LifeEmpowermentCh as you see that information on the screen. Listen, you can partner with us through PayPal, and that's our PayPal account, LEC at let-god.org. If you choose to send in maybe a check or money order, you can also do that in our Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. And as you can see, all of that information is there on your screen. And here's what I'm saying to you, that listen, you helped to make this broadcast possible. And I thank you for you being able to partner with us to make this happen. And so as you see there on the screen, listen, it is your way in helping Life Empowerment Church continue to bring the kind of teachings, the kind of relationship information that changes your life. And so we just ask, if this has been a blessing, if this has been an investment to you, we ask that you would make that change, make that investment here. And so listen, so we thank you so much for being here for RUFF'N IT. We thank you so much for taking time out. Now listen, if this has been a blessing to you, listen, we want to make sure that you take time out to share this. So if you're watching us on YouTube, listen, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you hit that bell icon with those notifications. If you're with us on Facebook, listen, make sure that you are liking our page. Make sure that you are following us. Listen, like, follow, and share. And so, listen, we thank you. And listen, we appreciate you. And listen, share this with somebody that you believe that can make or help make a difference in the relationship that you have with them. All right, listen, this is Pastor and Therapist Marcus, and I look forward to seeing you next Thursday as we continue with RUFF'N IT.